And good morning to everybody. Good evening for those of you who are maybe out in the Far East. My name is Chris Smith. I'm the Managing Director of our consultancy group. And I'm going to suggest that we get this process started. And I'd like to start by saying welcome, thank you Peter, to everybody that's on the call. And let me just say, I just want to say a few words to welcome you to this webinar, which is kind of launching our Jam session this week. About which I'm really excited. So the people that we've got on the call are a range of people from across the world, from BCG, from VP Strategies, a range of people involved in the leadership and change community. So those who are employed by the firm and others who are associates, part of our network, around the world in Asia, Europe and the Americas. And do feel free to put into the chat line just who you are, where you are. Really interested in hearing about that. Let me just say a couple of things about why we're doing this. We're doing this for 4 reasons, this Jam this week. Partly it's to help build our community, our learning community, and connect together in a different way. We want to share some insights. We want to deepen our understanding of leadership and leadership development, drawing on the whole experience that's represented on this session. And we want to think about how we might use this kind of approach in working with our clients on their development needs. So we're experimenting as well. And finally, we want to find ways to grow our business together. So what can we do to find new business for ourselves across the world to grow what we do and make a difference to our clients? So I'm really excited about this week. I'm really excited to connect with you all and to share things through the Jam process. As we work through this webinar, and I'll talk you through the agenda in a moment, one of the things I'd like you to do is to keep using the chat button on the right-hand side of your screen. If you've got questions, use the chat rather than the Q&A. We found that seems to work better. So do use that as we go through the day, and the session, and we'll be picking them up and responding as and when. So what are we going to do today, this morning, in this session? We're going to start by giving you some briefing around a learning Jam. For those of you who aren't familiar with the concept and approach, we're going to give you a quick briefing around what that is, how it works, and how we're going to be using it this week. We're then going to hear from Professor Peter Hawkins, the founder of VARS, and still very much part of our team, who's going to be talking a bit about the research that he's been leading recently and that we've been heavily involved in together with Henley Business School around tomorrow's world and tomorrow's leadership. And what's needed then in terms of leadership and development, so the necessary revolution in leadership development. We'll be pausing from time to time to pick up on the questions that you pose in the chat line, and we'll try and summarise and draw some of those out. So keep posting them as they come to mind, and then we'll pause from time to time and work with those. So that's enough for me to just get us started and give you a sense of what we're doing. I'm really looking forward to engaging with all of you at some point through the week, hopefully, through the Jam process. And to help explain what that Jam process involves, I'm going to hand across to Margaret Bishop, who's been leading on this initiative. Margaret.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Share Chris's excitement. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this, our first day of jamming, on our very first ever Jam. Like Chris said, please do keep the questions coming on the chat, and we will be trying to collect those and answer certainly a selection of them as we go through. Also, a big thank you to our colleague and associate Sally Cross, who's worked tirelessly with, particularly with Caroline Labarth, although everybody's sort of, chipped in to make this Jam happen. So Sally's our kind of expert on jamming and brings all her experience, ex-IBM, global engagement. So she's been, thank you very much, Sally. And so, what is a Jam? That's the question that everybody just keeps asking. So it is, as it says on the slide, it's creating the opportunity for collaborative, online, organisational-wide conversations. And it's online, partly because that's a very realistic way to do it. And, it transcends all of our usual boundaries. And it's also what gives it its strength. So it's a really focused opportunity, while at the same time it's sort of very generous in its length. So typically it'd be open for 3 to 5 days. We're keeping this one open until the very end of Friday, so there's plenty of room for everybody's ideas, and hopefully it will fit in with everybody's schedules. So it is designed to be a transformational event. It has a structure, but within that there's lots of room for being creative. So as well as chat, there's, you can post videos, you can post links, and really start to connect with people right across the system. So yeah, part of the structure is having a very clear context and a strategic question, which I'll go into later, and some objectives, some of which Chris has already covered. And it is a real-time discussion, and it's also, because it's all open 24/7, it doesn't all have to happen at exactly the same time. And the more people, the better, because you get more diverse views, and hopefully we'll get some sort of genuinely new ideas. And I think that with this way of working, it really matches this kind of the ideas of cross-boundary working. So more and more of our clients are saying that they do need to have more boundaryless working inside the organisation and even outside, and a bit more agility as well. I think there's also something about it. It's very equal, because it doesn't matter if you don't speak the loudest, you don't have to get in first. There's plenty of time and space for everybody, and it can be up to, well, there's no limit really to the amount of people it can be. And I think we've got potentially 300 or 400 people who might join. So objectives of the JAM. Bath Consultancy Group and VW Associate JAM really wanted to give an opportunity to share the research. So BCG and VW have been working in partnership with Peter and Henley Business School, talking to clients and some potential clients around what they see as the real issues around leadership today and how we develop, what we need to do to revolutionise leadership development for the needs of tomorrow. So it's about how can we build more business for our mutual benefit. It's obviously a very competitive and rapidly changing market out there, and we've got this huge resource, all the brain power of all the associates and all the people who work for within the system. And if we can harness that, then who knows what we could achieve together. And again, it is about partnering across any of these boundaries. So we're going to create connections, we're going to share ideas, and we're going to demonstrate and experience what it's like to jam, so that we can think about how this might help with potential client work as well. So moving on to the structure of the jam. We do have a strategic question, and we wanted a strategic question that would give a sort of overarching shape to the jam, and it needed to be something that would be a sort of compelling proposition for clients and also for ourselves. So the way we shaped it is what we, so all of us together, do differently to develop today's leadership for tomorrow's world. So within that's what is really going to appeal to clients, and what is it that they're crying out for, and what appeals to us as well, and how does that all go together. Typically, on a jam, you might have between 8 and 12 forums. You don't want too many forums, because it gets too sort of, I don't want to say spread too thin, so will come. But anyway, it is, yes, we want to make it focused enough, so we've got 10 forums, and we've been very lucky to have lots of volunteers to host them. The hosts are there to really start the ball rolling, get the conversations going, and to dip in and out, and at the end of the day to come up with maybe a few headlines, a few highlights of the day to share with everybody else, so that people can come in and feel as though they haven't missed too much. And at the end of the day, our comms team is going to start sort of sending out some links and give us a few end-of-day posts. So that's what it is. I really encourage you to participate, enjoy, play, experiment, make connections, meet new people, get new ideas. So thank you for all joining in. I'm now going to hand over to Peter to talk us through the research.
Hi, and welcome from me, and thank you very much, Margaret. And Margaret's going to be watching all your questions coming in on the chat line. So please, if you've got any questions, even from the word go, start posting them there, and Margaret's going to be noting them down. And twice in the midst of this presentation, I'll stop and try and dialogue with Margaret about some of the questions that are coming in. I also noticed in the chat box that some people were getting some interference while Margaret was speaking. So hopefully that has stopped. now that I'm online, but do put in the chat box if there's any problems. So welcome. So I'm going to be talking about this research, and this has been a long sort of 2-year process, and thank you very much all of the associates in many parts of the world who've become research partners and have taken part in the interviewing process in collecting some of the data process as we've got along. So what was this research all about? Well, we started off with a view and a hypothesis that the leadership that was going to be needed for the organizations of tomorrow was quite different than what was needed in the 20th century. So we wanted to explore that and how is that being experienced by people in organizations. And then our other hypothesis was that the leadership development industry was lagging behind what was needed. And by the leadership development industry, I mean people in business schools, consultancies like Cecily White involved Consultancy Group and others throughout the world, people in coaching, the whole field of people who are trying to support leadership and learning, including in companies, what leadership development activities were happening inside organizations. And what we wanted to also look at was where was best practice? Where was some of the green shoots? And I'll be sharing some of those later. And if we then look at what we did, this is just some of the different companies we interviewed. And in each company, as I'll come on to in a moment, we talked to the CEO or somebody from the executive team. We talked to the head of HR or the head of learning and development, and we talked to somebody they nominated as a millennial leader of tomorrow. What we tried to do is to get a mixture of companies from different sectors, including the public sector and the not-for-profit, but also companies that were headquartered in different parts of the world. So that was just a selection. We're up to about 40 companies that have taken part. And then we also decided, in order to get some breadth as well as some depth, we'd look at the best surveys we could find. So we looked at 3 CEO surveys, 3 HR director surveys, and 3 surveys which were focused on millennials. And for those of you who aren't aware, millennials, we were using the most common definition, which is those people who went to, left school and went to college or out into the world of work after the year 2000. So roughly people who are currently under the age of 35. So hopefully we might even have some millennials online in this innovation learning jam. So we ended up with 3 lots of triangulated research. When we did the interviews from the companies, we were interested not only in what did the CEOs say, the HR and L&D directors say, and the millennials, but what were the differences between their different viewpoints. So we triangulated the interview data. We then took the survey data, 3 lots of 3 surveys, and we triangulated that to say what were the different themes that were coming out, and what's the dialogue between the themes. And then we took the leading edge thinkers, and we've interviewed, actually it's more than it says on the slide, we're up to about 15 thought leaders, people who'd written books on either leadership or leadership development in many different countries. And we interviewed them, as well as we ran a number of focus groups. And then we started to look at, well, how do we connect all that data? So at this stage, I certainly hit myself one of the themes that emerges, which is how do you deal with the tsunami of data that you end up having available to you in today's world? And how do we try and kind of relate it all and see the patterns and not lose the sense of pattern in data overload? But out of that came several themes, and I'm going to cover 3 today. Some themes about tomorrow's world, then what does that mean for leadership, and then what does that mean for leadership development, and where is some of the emerging new practice. So the first section, I'll stop after the first two to see what questions have come in. So please do keep putting some questions in the chat box. Let me just see. I think there are a few already beginning to come in, which is great. So it's great to see that the audio is okay as well. So let me just first of all talk about tomorrow's world. Now, what we did here is we took all the themes and we coded them, and we looked at which were the ones that most came up. So these are in order of priority. So the most common one that came up was unceasing and accelerating transformation. And if we look at that theme, one of the things that people said, and this is a nice quote, we've been talking about the VUCA world for 10 years or so. Now we are living it daily. Nearly every single person we interviewed talked about how not only were they living with constant change, but that constant change was getting faster. How do we deal with the fact, and for those of you who are familiar with the VUCA world, the fact that the world is both volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. But how do we deal with the fact that, as one CEO said, it's like I'm having to not only fly the plane of my organization, but I'm having to constantly rebuild the organization while we're mid-air. I'm having to stay in touch with ground control, leave the team in the cockpit, the team who are looking after all the customers, and I'm having to deal with other planes that are coming at me from all directions. That for me gave a very vivid picture of what leadership in today's world is like. So what did they say about the VUCA world? They said, well, change is not only constant, but it's even change is changing, the nature of change, the fact that change is more interconnected. The second one they talked a lot about was how do we operate in terms of running the business today, innovating for tomorrow, but also having the strategic foresight to look at what's coming over the horizon. The third, the one about complexity, was we're dealing with the fact that our stakeholders are much more interconnected than they've ever been. So we're not only dealing with the HR director looks after the people, the sales director looks after the customers, the finance director looks after the investors, but those worlds are much more fragmented and interconnected. And that leads to the ambiguity. And I'll be talking a bit later on about the three horizons. How do we work with the horizon of running today, the horizon of innovating tomorrow, and the horizon of anticipating the trends coming over the horizon? The second big theme that came up was how do we deal with the technological and digital revolution? And this quote from Klaus Schwab, who is chairman of Davos, the World Economic Forum. He talks about the fourth great industrial revolution that we're now entering, where not only do we have the acceleration of what's happening in the world of computers, the world of biotech, the world of other technological innovation, but these different sorts of innovation are all interconnecting. So we're seeing in a much greater way than ever before that you've got to cope with not only the acceleration of innovation in each of these, but how these are cross-creating in terms of, for instance, if you look at the whole thing about DNA modeling, which used to cost, to model one person's DNA was costing thousands upon thousands. Now we're seeing it as something that can be done via mobile telephony, bringing together biotechnical research, telecom research, and digital research, so that it will be something that's part of your own medical that you do by your own mobile phone. But with that comes the notion of how do we keep up with the way that plays back into the first theme of we're dealing with the impossibility. I quoted a number of talks I've given that some of you may have heard, working with two global experts on livers who are based in Oxford, who said, you look, about 5 years ago their world changed because for the first time they had patients coming into their surgery and into their clinic who knew more about the latest research than they did, because they had the opportunity to go on to Google every night and read it all up, and these doctors weren't able to because there was so much happening in the field. Not only did they know the latest research, their patients, but they knew where the best treatment was in the world, how much it cost, where it was happening, and were then banging the table and saying, why are we not getting that? We live in a world where anything you can do can be benchmarked against the best in the world. The third theme, disintermediation. A number of CEOs started to talk about the threat of being Uberized. And if I just give you one quote, which really struck home to me and stayed with me. This was a global CEO based in New York. He said, I wake up every morning terrified that we could be disrupted into oblivion. This is a high probability, not just a possibility. At the same time, we cannot afford to chase every new innovation that is falling out there in the market. However, if we stick to what we're good at, we'll be dead in the water. And if we chase every innovation, we'll be dead in the water. He said, that's the world I'm living with. This is a very successful organization that is saying that, what they're brilliant at today could become totally irrelevant in 4 or 5 years' time. Being Uberized was a phrase used by some, but it's not, just in taxis. We can see Airbnb in the hotel industry. We can see Netflix in its impact on the whole production of films and TV. All sorts of people were talking about the competition is no longer coming from somebody producing a better product. It's from somebody who is completely reworking the whole value chain of an industry. So innovation is going to be people who can make the right connections between different technologies, between the customers, the suppliers, and can network an industry differently. The next one was another consequence of technological, digital, artificial intelligence, roboticization, outsourcing. Every organization we talked to talked about, look, in the next 5 years, we are going to be employing less people than we do today. I was quite shocked to find out that in the last 20 years, large companies in the world have created zero growth in employment. And yet, there are more people in the world employed today than ever. But all that growth has not come from large companies. It's come from startups, small, medium-sized enterprises, and the not-for-profit or for benefit sector. And yet, this is going to accelerate because the companies are saying, actually, with outsourcing, with using of robots, artificial intelligence, computerization, disintermediation, we're going to be employing far less people and hollowing out the middle of our organization. And yet, they said to us, we'll be employing less people internally, but we'll have to partner with a far greater complexity of other stakeholders. And this led us to realize that the very nature of leadership is changing. It's going to be less about leading my team, my people, my function, my organization, and far more about how do we network and partner across boundaries. The next was about globalization. And what was striking here was that even when we started to look at some small startup organizations or ones that seemingly were more local, we realized that there is no organization that is not having to deal with a globalized world. Because even if you're a local business, your customers could be global, your competitors could be global, your investors, your suppliers, that all those things are operating on a globalized world. And despite what's happened in the UK with Brexit and the growth of America post-Trump into a more isolationist position, there is nothing that won't stop globalization. I think the current estimate is that 2 billion more people will join the World Wide Web within the next 5 years. So we will be a globalized, interconnected world, and any business, no matter how small, is going to have to cope with that. The next was climate change. And it was very noticeable that this appeared much higher on the millennial ratings than it did on those for chief executives. Indeed, some of the chief executives, when we went through in first half, didn't even mention climate change. But when that was commented on, they immediately said, oh yes, of course, that's going to be very important. And in the research report, we do some analysis of why that might be, that somehow people go into denial at one level while recognizing the issue at another. But there is a sense in which a lot of the other trends in the world will be massively impacted by the increasing effects of climate change and how that will affect migration, global inequality, and how that will have an impact back on the political, economic, and social trends. And finally, the theme that then is impacted by all of those is how do we learn and adapt faster? And I'll be talking about that because several said from the millennials, should I go on an MBA when I've got a young family, very full work life, I could be spending lots of hours and lots of money doing it, and will what I learn on the course still be relevant by the time I've finished it? How do we get learning and development to be operating at the same speed that technology is changing and that organizations are changing? The quote at the top goes right back to Reg Revan, the founder of Action Learning, who said, if learning is not equaling or greater than the rate that the environment is changing, you're on the road to extinction. And we are seeing a real emergence in a lot of organizations about saying, look, a lot of what we've been focusing on is leader development. Now we need to make sure that all the leader development, whether it's individual coaching, whether it's people going on courses, is feeding in to organizational learning. Because the rate at which our organization learns is probably the most sustainable competitive advantage we've got. So those are the 7 global trends. And just before we pause, these are 9 implications for changing the leadership paradigm that needs to underpin leadership development. I've already talked about how do we move from leading my people to realizing that leadership is about orchestrating across the business ecosystem. And that phrase is cropping up more and more in a number of the surveys and a number of the interviews. The second trend, which has been written about quite a bit in the last 10 years, but is becoming even more higher up the agenda. How do we move from heroic individual leader development to leadership developing collective and collaborative leadership across an organization? How do we recognize that all leadership development needs to be about shifting the collective leadership culture, to shift the organizational culture, to shift the organization's ability to learn, develop, and thrive in the world of tomorrow? Fourth, there was a lot of talking about the move to much more purpose-driven leadership. A lot about how do we have leadership that creates value not just for shareholders but for all stakeholders. Some of you know the paper by Michael Porter in 2011 that talked about how do we move from share value to shared value across all the stakeholders, showing that the companies that are really going to thrive today and into the future will be ones that consistently grow value for customers, employees, stakeholders, communities in which they operate, as well as for their shareholders. The fourth one, I started to talk about the 3 horizons, which comes from Bill Sharp, which a number of people mentioned. But one of the things that Bill Sharp very strongly talks about is to really succeed, it's no good just managing today, doing continuous improvement into innovation incrementally for tomorrow. Instead, we have to go running today and managing today, jump into Horizon 3 and do strategic foresight about what is the world of tomorrow going to look like, and do our innovation back from the future, not from today forward. Because otherwise we'll be stuck doing incremental innovation, and we will not be making the quantum shifts that are needed to stay at the pace that tomorrow's world will require. I'll just mention, because we want to pause for some questions a moment, Margaret, but quickly mention a few of the others. The one about purpose in number 3 also links to number 7. There's been a lot of research on millennials, and we were trying to really sift out what is different about today's people in their 20s and early 30s from what was true 20 years ago or 40 years ago when I was in my 20s. Because the danger is otherwise we look at stuff coming up in millennial surveys, and a lot of it may have been true about any young people in their 20s in any period. But what does seem to be true is that many more millennials are motivated and are wanting to start their own business rather than work for corporates. Many see their world of work is something where they will go and work for one organization and then move on and hopefully start their own business, late 30s, or they see a much more diverse career structure. At the end of the research report, we put together a whole letter which summarized a lot of the great phrases that young people were using. But a lot of things they were saying, there's a great line where they said, and this came from several of them, don't just give us a learning and development review once a year or a performance review. Things change much faster. Don't go take us through a tick box exercise. Talk to us regularly about how we see our future and how you see our future. Help us navigate our learning and development pathway. By the way, we want to be treated as partners, not as people who are managed. We want to be working for a firm that's really making a difference in the world and is having impact. And I think there's a whole world about how do we help organizations not manage millennials better, but partner with millennials in order to both retain and develop them quicker, but also to use their way of being to accelerate the learning of the organization. Going back to number 5, there was a lot that came up about working with diversity, not only diversity of ethnicity, diversity of gender, diversity of innate individual diversity, but how do we also work with cognitive diversity and systemic diversity? How do we get the different voices of the different stakeholders into the decision-making rooms? And I think one of the things we're going to see in leadership development is not how do you just take internals in an organization and run a program for them, but how do you bring the stakeholders' voice into the design of the leadership development, into the delivery of the leadership development, and into participating in the leadership development? How do we design leadership programs that run across a business ecosystem, not just within the organization? And number 8, there's a lovely quote from a CEO who said, look, I used to, when I had an ethical issue, just turn to my legal counsel. But now I realize that the law is at least 5 years behind technology, and we can't rely on precedent. He said, instead, what I have to do with my top team, when we have a really complex moral or ethical issue, is say to them, how will our decision today look when we're hacked into and this decision goes viral on social media? He said, what all my top team need to realize is that we live in a fishbowl. Anything that we do could be seen by any of our stakeholders sooner or later. So we have to be totally conscious, not only of thinking about our stakeholder world and how they view our decisions, but also thinking about how this will look in a year's time or 2 years' time. And indeed, there's one thought leader in our research who talks about, how do we adopt the Native American approach of thinking how this will look in the 7 generations that follow us. Because today we're making decisions in the boardroom that will have impact for generations to come. So I think we're dealing with a complex new world that we're moving into, and that's going to require different sorts of leadership. So, Margaret, let's kind of pause there and see what questions have come in about tomorrow's world and tomorrow's leadership that we explore together before I go on to talking about leadership development and how that was viewed.
Okay, Peter. Well, we've had lots of chat and some questions, and there's a few themes coming out. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine, Margaret.
Good, lovely. Okay, so there was something about what defines boundaries in organisations. If they're getting much softer and more permeable, is it about common purpose? Is it about meaningful work?
Yeah, I think that there was that the whole thing about purpose-led organizations is very strong, but also purpose-led partnerships. So there's a great quote from a thought leader who said, look, vision and mission are all 20th century concepts. The notion that a team go off and come up with, in a smart hotel somewhere, their vision and mission for the organization. But the notion that purpose is 21st century language, which is starting off by saying, who is our organization and our work there to serve? And how can we make a greater beneficial impact for all those stakeholders we're there to serve? And indeed, in working across boundaries, which was, I think you mentioned, Margaret,
yeah,
the first question for any partnership needing to be, who is this partnership there to serve? And what is it we can achieve together to make a beneficial impact in the world that we can't achieve by working in parallel? So, the problem with, I've worked with lots of struggling partnerships in the public sector, and mostly they come together and they both put forward their suggestions, and they go into transactional bartering rather than, and then they start to look at, well, how do we set up the right governance, which are the wrong starting questions. The question for any partnership must be, what's this partnership there to achieve together that we can't achieve apart? And starting with purpose.
And then there was a related question that came in just now about, so as all these boundaries blur, what are the differences and the things that are going to make us distinctive? Why are we going to stand out?
If you look at what Airbnb did, or what Netflix or Uber did, is what they did. They started off by spotting a need which they could connect different resources to. So I think you stand out because you're starting off by discovering something that is not really catered for in the way that's now possible. And you're, if you like, the orchestrators of that connection. You can bring together, say, take Uber, you can bring together the drivers, you can bring together the billing system, you can bring together the app that creates the access. And it's your ability to network, your ability to connect that gives you your distinctiveness, not your product or your location.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity, spotting the opportunity to connect.
Spotting the opportunity and then being able to best orchestrate the resources that speak to that.
Okay, a couple of other things just before we move on, so I'm mindful of time. There was a question about how global are the trends we're describing, and also a comment from India, but from an Indian perspective, actually, what you were saying did really resonate. But generally speaking, how globally consistent did you find the research?
It was fascinating because after the first round, when we paused and shared the initial findings with some of the organisations, get them to respond and come back, we realised that it was rather Western. So we purposely went off and looked at some Chinese companies, some other companies in the Far East. We also looked at Southern Africa. And interestingly, I would have thought most of the themes were fairly global. In some ways, I was amazed at some of the innovation in organisations that's coming out of China, where I think they are really leapfrogging some of the late 20th century ways of operating and going to a much more radical 21st century way without going through the steps that the West went through. So yeah, I'm not sure that we picked up much global difference.
Okay, and finally, anything more to say about how change is changing?
well, perhaps I pick that one up, Margaret, as I go into this next section.
Okay, go ahead.
How is leadership development measuring up? Because I think, just to that question from Margaret, it's coming from your questions. I'm predicting that in the next 5 years, possibly, maybe slightly longer, we'll see that leadership development, organizational development, and strategy will end up being all in the same function. Because I think that the need that emerged from the research to have organizational learning, team learning, individual learning, and ecosystem learning with our stakeholders is a very strong trend that's emerging. And how do we build learning into not something we go off and do in business schools or on courses in smart hotels, but how do we build learning into the very fabric of what we're doing? So let me just start with, some of you may have come across Barbara Kenneman's work. She wrote a book called The End of Leadership. The leadership industry has not in any major, meaningful, measurable way improved the human condition. She does a very strong, the whole book is a critique of how much is spent on leadership development. And yet, how in the public sector, in politics, in corporate life, we're just getting more and more scandals, and trust in leadership is getting worse. So given that backdrop, we talk to people about, how did they view leadership development? And we've got a lot of these sorts of comments. What I've just kind of spoken to, that actually strategy, the strategy department, and what's happening in OD and what's happening in leadership development are not joined up today. Yeah? So how do we have those much more integrated? A lot about how do we, somebody said to me, look, chief executive, he said, my challenges, Peter, don't lie in the people and they don't lie in the parts. All my challenges in my organisation lie in the connections between functions, the connections between different leaders, the connections between the teams. And yet, he said to me, all the coaches are coaching individuals and all the consultants are consulting to the parts. But that's not where the real challenge lies. So I think that's a big challenge for leadership development. How do we coach the connections? And how do we develop the connections within the organisation and across the ecosystem? The third one, and this speaks to a lot of stuff that's been written about kind of virtual leadership and how do we shift mindsets and thinking. Many people are saying too much leadership development on skills and knowledge, and somehow a lot of that can be picked up either in e-learning or can be picked up on the best learned on the job. But where we do need to go away and have space to reflect is about how do we shift our action logics, our ways of thinking. And then very interesting when we start to look at evaluation. I think evaluation in leadership development is way, way off the pace. Interestingly, when we ask CEOs about how do they evaluate their leadership development, most of them say, I've no idea. But all the HR directors, oh yes, we got this sort of method. But certainly if they do have those methods, their CEOs weren't aware of them. And most leadership development evaluation is either based on inputs, what did you think about your suppliers, or it's about outputs. Very little leadership development research today really looks at outcomes or value creation. Here's just some quotes. Leadership development is too backwards looking. It needs to bring in more futuristic viewpoints. We're still operating an industrial age leader development approach, not developing 21st century leadership. We've shut down all the leadership development programs. The notion that leadership competencies mostly are based on what made yesterday's individuals great, not what is needed from collective leadership. So these were kind of 7 areas when we asked people, well, where do you see the most innovative leadership development happening either in your company or elsewhere? These were some of the things that emerged. How do we have challenge-based learning? So that is, rather than sending people off to start from theory, how do we get the top teams to say, these are some of the challenges we see coming over the horizon. Let's take those challenges and let's set up some young future leaders to work on those using things like what we're doing, a learning jam or a hackathon. And how do we have somebody from the top team mentor that challenge team? There's a lot of work happening around edge teams, red teams, black ops teams, challenge teams, and how do we have each of those challenge teams have a learning developer, somebody who's real versed in all sorts of change tools and leadership tools, who can work with those teams so they're learning all sorts of things while they're working on that challenge. They're learning how to manage change, how to work across functions, how to use a hackathon, how to bring in stakeholder perspectives, how to do data analysis, how to influence upwards while they're working on a real strategic challenge. The second one was there's lots of work being done, and I know some people online have been involved in this, deep immersion training, where you take a team or you take leaders from different places and you take them to the slums of Mumbai, or Henley take people out to townships in South Africa. You get them to work with local people in a very different culture on a real issue where they have to make change happen within a week or 2 weeks. Again, that helping people shift their whole mindset and way of thinking by throwing them into a very different world, which kind of gives them existential cage, I think was the phrase that was used by one person. Number 3, some of you know I've been very involved in how do, rather than develop individual leaders, how do we develop leadership teams? And rather than take individuals off to training, take the development into the place, into the kitchen of the team meetings where they're working on real issues. A lot of work being done around how do we do peer consultancy and secondments across organisations, across the stakeholder system. So, if we've got a problem with one of our business out in Zambia, we take some people from India and we get them to go and work with the real change. So supported network peer consultancy. How do we accelerate millennial development by getting them to do shadowing of leaders? Or one company we came across had a shadow board of young millennial leaders who were working on the same strategic questions that the board were working on. And then there was a dialogue event between the two. The 6th was that all the millennials were saying, look, don't just give us a list of courses. What we want is a personalized learning journey, which is a mixture of coaching, mentoring, shadowing, secondments, challenge opportunities. And how do we help leaders become developers and learning navigators? The notion that the most important person for your leadership development is the person you report to. But often the people you report to have no idea how to help you, how to co-create with you your personalized learning journey, and to help you as a mentor and learning navigator. And there's, I think, a great opportunity for us to help leaders develop the skills as not just leader as coach, but leader as learning as leadership developer and navigator. And 7th, I think a very exciting area that I get very passionate about is there's a lot being done around mindfulness training, compassion training, well-being training, which is all about going in. And there's another whole school that are going out into systemic thinking, systemic relating, how do we think and act and relate systemically. But I think the trend of the next 10 years will be to bring these together, to realize that self-awareness is systemic awareness, and systemic awareness absolutely requires self-awareness. And these two fields, I think, will require much more integration in ways that we've not yet discovered. So let's pause again. I've covered a great deal. So what's coming, Margaret?
Well, this is quite a long question, but I think it's a good one. So what is the implication for us as consultants and facilitators if our clients are on the road to extinction, if their learning is not equal or greater than the rate of change of their environment? What speed do we as consultants need to learn at, and how do we do that?
Well, I think one of the things that I've been speaking a lot of conference about recently is I think all coaches, all consultants, all leadership developers need to have a lot more moral courage and to realize that part of their role is as alarm clocks to wake up individuals, teams, organizations, and to help them to have the crisis before they have the crisis. I think all of the people in the leadership development industry have been far too much in response mode rather than alarm clock wake-up mode. So I think part of our job, some of you will have read Margaret Heffernan's book, and she was one of the people we interviewed, called Willful Blindness. And I think part of our job is to help people see what they're willfully blind to seeing. And that's going to require, us stepping up as consultants and coaches and leadership developers. Don't know if you agree with that, Margaret. We're looking for another question.
Yes, I was busy looking for another question there. If we've got time for one more, there's a theme going on around are we risking being labelled digital dinosaurs, or is it really a core skill to develop our digital capability as consultants?
I think, in today's world, we have to be able to operate across multiple mediums. We have to be able to, do innovation and learning jams, hackathons. We have to be able to do global webinars. We have to be able to use all the different kind of mediums that are available to us. Otherwise I think we'll be left behind by a world that's gone digital. As I say to coaches, we now know that there are coaching apps available that can read people's moods. They have a better bank of the best bank of coaching questions from all around the world available to them. Can empathise, so we need to discover what we can do as coaches that a coaching app can't do better.
Okay, and last question, have we got time for that? Yeah, okay. Something around, I think this is linked, a shift in mindset, and also whether digital learning is enough around, there's something about leadership maturity, because we need leadership maturity, the right action logic in order to respond to VUCA.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking at vertical leadership, this is something that I think is very hard to do online or by e-learning. I think this is where you've got to create the right collaborative spaces, and you need leadership retreats where you help people shift their action logic by working on a challenge collectively that they cannot meet. They recognize it's important, but they cannot deal with their current way of thinking and relating. So by holding them in a safe space where they're working on a challenge which is beyond the current way of thinking and relating, the challenge helps create that shift in action logic and mindset. So hopefully, Margaret, that gives us, because I just want to mention a couple of things about, hopefully, we've managed to stimulate some not answers, but some new questions that we can all take into the learning jam throughout this week and into the different themes that are going to be available. But I just wanted to mention that Margaret, Sally, myself and Chris, we're all going to be here on Friday when we're going to bring back what's emerged throughout the learning jam. And we're also going to work on our own. How do we get out of our own mindsets and our own bubble? So we're going to have on Friday, not a webinar like this, but one where we're going to have a fishbowl dialogue, where we'll get all the people who have been hosts to start to explore some of the great new generative thinking that's emerged. But then we'll also have an opportunity to open people's mics so that all the people who join on Friday can also join the fishbowl dialogue, not all at the same time, but to come in, so we've got much more of a dialogical exploration. So I just wanted to mention that, Margaret, and I rather enjoyed this graphic as well. So there you are. We're all going to be not the fish who are the last to know about the water, but we're all going to become flying fish that get out of our own set ways of thinking. And then finally, I just wanted to say that I'm really excited about what's going to emerge throughout all these different themes, these different questions, this kind of great collaborative inquiry we're involved in this week. And to say that when I was young, I was brought up as a kind of very Protestant way of being and thinking, which was always, work hard today and eventually you'll get rewarded. And we only had bread and butter in the week, and we only got jam on Sundays. Or as the Americans call it, jelly, or as the French call it, confiture. So I'm delighted that finally I can say, for the rest of this week, we're going to have jam today. And it's my pleasure to kind of get this launched along with Margaret and Sally and Chris, and to say happy jamming, and let's look at what we might be able to generate together that today none of us yet know, but by Friday in our connectivity we'll have created. So have a great week, enjoy jamming, and let's see what we can achieve today that will make a difference to the leadership development that the world urgently needs. So thank you.
And thank you, Peter. See you all at the jam.
And thank you to all the 60-odd people who've joined this call. Fantastic.
Very good. Okay, bye.